All right, class. This next lecture is going to be about APA style. This is going to be important for you in terms of being able to write your research paper. So this lecture is going to be very important for you to understand. To give you a quick overview, we have a thought of the day. We'll spend some time giving you a quick overview of APA style. We'll talk about references, in-text citations, and then highlight a couple of additional APA related issues. So the thought of the day is "The future belongs to those who prepare for it today" by Malcolm X. I really want you to think about this so that you can recognize that your actions today will impact your future. So whether you put in a lot of time and effort in terms of your studies will impact your options going forward. So just commit to each day doing your best and doing all that you have to do, and your future will be brighter as a result. So let's get into APA style. Now, APA style is just simply a set of rules that are used to ensure that people are presenting their information in a clear and concise way. And you're going to use APA style for any term paper, research reports, empirical studies, literature reviews, theoretical articles. Basically, any paper that you're going to write in psychology, you're going to use APA style format for. And the American Psychological Association just published the 7th edition of the APA manual. It came out a couple months ago, so um, it's very new. And I would say if you were to get one of the manuals, go ahead and get the newest edition of it, because that's going to be what's going to be used as essentially the APA Bible for probably the next 10, 15 years. So um, if you are planning on going to graduate school, it does make sense to go ahead and buy the 7th edition. In terms of your papers, I'll accept um, any formatting you use based upon the 6th or the 7th edition. Now, there are 10 components of an APA style paper. I'm going to focus my energy mainly on the ones in orange, so the abstract, intro, methods, results, and discussion. But you should familiarize yourself with all 10 components and be able to put them in order. One thing you should also think about in terms of the structure of an APA style paper, in terms of an empirical paper, is that it starts out very broadly by identifying what the research question is, and then it gets a little bit narrower by focusing on the literature that's we presently have on that particular topic, and then it gets very narrow when it gets to your hypotheses, your particular studies, your results, and then it broadens back out in the discussion section, which is at the end, where it talks about how your findings relate back to the broader question that you discussed at the beginning of the paper. So what are the implications of your work to that broader question? So I'm going to go through the different parts. So the title page, the purpose of that is to simply report the name of the article, the authors, and the author's affiliation. So affiliation being what institution they're affiliated with. So in terms of the title, you're going to want to make sure the title explains or at least identifies the key variables and on some level explains the relationship between those variables. The trick is that you only have about 12 words to do this, so each word has to have some meaning and significance. And it takes a little bit of practice to come up with titles that are very clear. My advice is just look at other titles and start getting a sense of how people write them, and then try to find a similar format for your particular title. So as I said, the title should also include the author's name and their institutional affiliation. So for you, it should be your name and then John Jay College, and it should have a running head, which is at the top of the paper. It's a shortened version of your title, and again, it's just there to kind of help the reader know a little bit more about what your paper is about. So maybe you have a very shortened version of the title for the running head. The word itself, running head, should be in upper and lowercase. but the actual words that make up the running head should be in all caps. So I'll give you an example here at the bottom. The effect of sleep on memory is in all capital letters, whereas the word itself, running head, is uppercase and lowercase. I would advise you to look at some sample APA papers before trying to write your title page. There's a sample in the book. I've posted a sample paper in Blackboard. So definitely refer to those before trying to write your title page. And the key is just to put these pieces of information in the right place. Now let's talk about the introduction. I'll come back to the abstract at the end. The intro is basically there to justify why you conducted your particular study or series of studies. And there are three main sections to an intro. The first is introducing the problem. The second is a literature review. And then the third is to state your rationale for your hypotheses. So state the hypotheses and then provide a rationale for them. So you definitely want to remember these three components of an intro and make sure that you have all three in your intro. And again, this is the broad section of the paper, so we're really talking on very general terms about what the problem is. In terms of introducing your problem, you want to convince the reader that your problem is important. So you're going to want to provide some context to the research question. Maybe you might include some statistics. Just trying to find ways to get the reader to be interested in the problem or whatever question you're looking at. And ideally try to find some way to connect your research to the human experience, because this is psychology, so on some level you want to make sure that your introduction to the problem highlights a real human experience. The lit review, as I'm sure you all are aware, is just there to provide a rationale for your study. So you want to take all of the key relevant literature, theories, empirical studies on your particular topic and synthesize them in a way that's clear and coherent. You don't want to report everything that exists on your particular topic, but really the most relevant ones, and you want to structure it in a way that it's easy for the reader to identify the key theories and studies as it pertains to your particular paper. So a couple of tips for writing a literature review. The literature review is really there to make an argument for your study. So think about what are the main points that you're trying to argue, and then find articles that support those points. It really helps if you structure your paragraphs around a particular claim and then use the literature in the lit review to help support that claim. You don't want to write a literature review where each paragraph is simply a summary of a particular study or a particular paper. You want to make a claim in the beginning of your topic sentence and then use the findings of the paper that you're reading to support those claims. Right, so you really want to build your lit review around the claims or the arguments that you're making. And those claims or arguments need to be building towards your hypothesis, because your goal here is to convince the reader that your hypothesis is grounded. And then the third part, you want to provide a rationale for your hypotheses. So you want to clearly state what the hypotheses are, and the hope is that by the time the reader gets your hypotheses, you've structured your intro in a way in which your hypotheses make sense. If the reader gets your hypotheses and doesn't understand where they came from, that's problematic, because you should be building that argument throughout your intro. So by the time they get to the hypotheses, it should be pretty apparent why you made these particular hypotheses. And then you want to state your hypotheses in a declarative way. So like X will be positively related to Y, or X will cause changes in Y. It's not a question. You're making a specific statement about what you think the relationship is going to be between your variables of interest. Now let's move to the method section. This is where you're providing details about the participants and the procedures in your study, so that if someone wanted to, like if reviewers wanted to evaluate it, they could do so, or if someone wanted to replicate your study, they could have enough information to be able to try to replicate your results. And there are three typical subsections in a method section: participants, materials, and procedures. And again, this is where we're starting to get more narrow in terms of our focus, because now we're focusing on your particular study, your particular methods. Whereas before we were talking about broader level things. So in terms of your participant section, your goal here is to tell the reader about who your participants are. So you wanted to give the total number of participants in your sample, ideally give an average age and maybe a range for the age, the number of men and women. If you have people from different racial groups, you want to give the breakdown of those racial groups. And then if someone happened to be excluded from your study or end up dropping out of the study, you should report that in this section as well. The materials section, this is just providing the reader with the different materials that participants were exposed to in the study. So if you gave them a test or a questionnaire or a survey, you want to provide information about the different components of that test, scale, questionnaire, survey. And if you use pre-existing measures or a pre-existing survey, you want to make sure you cite where you got that survey from. So you want to cite that source. The procedure section is pretty straightforward. Your goal here is to just tell the reader what the participants did in chronological order. So they came to the lab, they signed a consent form, they did X, Y, and Z. Just give it to the reader in order. If you have a manipulation, you want to explain the different levels of the manipulation. So the people who were in the 25 student classroom, or they were in a 75 student classroom, or participants were exposed to 100 milligrams of caffeine versus 100 milligrams of decaf. So you want to explain the differences between the different conditions that participants were exposed to.